For as long as I can remember, I've always been fascinated with the outdoors, camping, cabins, and just everything about being off the grid. I really don't remember a time when I didn't have a dream of someday owning some remote property somewhere and building a cabin on it. I love everything that an off-grid cabin stands for. It's an escape from the day-to-day routines of work, technology, screens, and convenience. A cabin makes you work for your relaxation, makes you appreciate the little things, and makes you really think about every little tiny thing that you're doing. It's that deliberate slowing down that I know I need in my busy life. Well, in January of 2025, my wife and I finally made the dream a reality. We purchased a 40-acre off-grid parcel in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. One of the biggest draws to this particular property was the creek that snakes through the land, granting more than 2,500 feet of water frontage. The other upside is the fact that not only is there a cleared spot for building, there's actually already the bones of a cabin built. It's framed, roofed, and mostly dried in, but completely unfinished. It's a blank canvas for finishing, but a huge head start on enjoying this property. While on paper, or more accurately on Zillow, this all seemed really awesome, checking out the land in person for the first time offered a few surprises that the listing didn't really show. We walked in across this little bridge to several partially collapsed tents, about a dozen tarps covering things, and what amounted to an abandoned work site.
Tents, collapsed, all this stuff back here. Very strange. Yeah, just cans in there and man. String trimmer, tools, tarp, string lights.
A huge light.
No, it's a cement mixer, like an electric mixer. Tools and cooking stuff left behind. Big pot, hammer.
Honestly, at first, I was really uncomfortable with the whole thing. It seriously looked like somebody had left to go get lunch one day and just never come back. I half expected to find a body in one of the tents. It was eerie. Luckily, eventually we were actually able to connect with the seller of the property directly and learn a little bit more about why it was left behind with everything, and I mean everything, where it was. The very short version is that the previous owner was living on the property in a tent and building a tiny recreational cabin. He lived several states away, and eventually family and responsibilities at home called and he had to answer. I think he always meant to come back and clean the place up, but it ended up being too logistically challenging and he simply had to list the property for sale as is. The first time my wife and I saw the property was early January, and the snow and ice on everything basically made it impossible to even see what was under most of the tarps and tents. But we were able to check out the cabin. It was a 10 by 18 shed-style roof with very tall ceilings. Right away, though, I did have some questions on the roof, which had this sort of skylight feature made out of plastic panels. Now, the UP gets a ton of snow, and I was worried right away about roof collapse. I also noted that the rafters were built inside of the cabin using these joist hangers, and because of this, the roof has zero overhang on the tall side and both gable ends. Now, I'm no expert builder, but I was pretty sure that this is not how a roof is supposed to be built if you want it to last more than a year or two. There was also some discoloration that looked a whole lot like water damage on some of the floor and parts of the ceiling plywood. But there were also a few really good things left behind at the property. This power station had been left in the cabin, plus 2 banks of solar panels just sitting out in the snow for months. But honestly, faults aside, I really liked this cabin, and it just felt to me like a building that wanted to be finished up and done right. After this, my wife and I went back home and almost immediately decided, kind of on the drive home, to put an offer in on the property. We also thought a little bit more about the stuff that was sitting outside and decided to head back up the following weekend to try to get some of the more valuable things into the cabin and get the place closed up for the rest of the winter, assuming that it would be ours soon. This included moving a 280-pound wood stove that was sitting near the parking area that luckily I was able to sled in and then just wrestle into the cabin. We also moved in the solar panels and tucked some things under the cabin for safekeeping. Finally, I really wanted to get some measurements so I could start to figure out plans for finishing the cabin down the road. The next thing on my journey was unfortunately shoulder surgery in mid-January. During the incredibly slow recovery, I watched hundreds of hours of cabin building, land management, and homesteading videos on YouTube. Being essentially unable to do anything, but knowing that we had closed on the property and it was ours, I got an aggressive form of cabin fever and talked my wife and dad into going up for a quick work trip before it was set to get really cold and snowy in February. Well, let's just say that it was a challenge. We had plans to insulate and lay down subfloor, but the snow, me being in a sling, and some bitterly cold weather turned the work trip into more of a survival trip. We didn't really get much done other than to burn the stove in and set it up inside, hoping that it could warm an uninsulated cabin in 7-degree Fahrenheit weather. To add insult to injury, we got a few inches of snow overnight and the truck got stuck badly trying to leave the property. I walked down the trail and managed to flag down some snowmobilers riding nearby, and I think they took pity on me and my sling and agreed to help. With the help of those absolute strangers and heroes, we got out of the property and vowed that we would not come back until we knew that all of the snow was gone. On the upside, in January alone, we had been to the property 3 times, but now it was time to hunker through the rest of winter and return in the spring. We learned a valuable lesson about winter access to the property, which is basically there is no driving to the property when there's more than a couple inches of snow on the ground. But now we had plans and motivation for a spring work trip. Look for another video on that spring work trip in the future, as well as a roof disaster that really moved up our timeline for some necessary repairs. Finally, always remember, perfection is the enemy of progress. Get out there and go do something cool.